Thank you for joining XROM, which is India's first AR/VR focused podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Shourya Agarwal, who's the founder and CEO at Flam App that's working on building an augmented reality based social metaverse. So, Shourya, welcome to the show. Why don't we start with a brief introduction and your journey in building Flam App?
Sure. So first things first, thanks a lot, Eddie, for inviting me on the podcast. And then very quickly, I'm from Rajasthan. I've studied from Mayo College. That's where I did my schooling from, and then went to BITS for computer science engineering. Just out of college 3 years back, we started working on the core tech stack of Flam, and May 2021 is when we launched the company. So basically last year is when we launched the company. Flam essentially is building creation tools and a whole social media platform for everything 3D AR VR, which you can call Metaverse. And that's a very high level definition. But essentially, when we talk about Metaverse in general, I think it's as fundamental as it can get. And it is basically 3D internet. So internet in the last 30 years has always been two-dimensional. And Metaverse is like adding third dimension to the internet, right? So essentially it's 3D internet. So Flam is building a whole social media network for everything 3D. So for example, if you look at last 20 years of social networking, how we have evolved from Orkut, which is like text first social platform, to Instagram, which is image first social platform, to TikTok, which is like video first social platform. So I think media has been evolving pretty fast from text to image to video, and every time we move from one media type to another, immersion increases, right? So I think the future of social is going to be everything 3D, and that's like 100x more immersive, and that's exactly what we are building.
Lovely, super awesome. Sounds really, really exciting. And you mentioned about the evolution of internet, us breaking away from the 2D to the 3D medium, and how the social media stack itself has evolved from text to image to video. And then, there's this generative AI, which is kind of like just 2022 has been the year. So there are so many dynamics which is being played out. And there's a big question mark, when it comes to social media, especially, from Elon Musk taking over Twitter, and, people saying, there could be an underlying Web 3.0 sitting on it, So what are the problems of the current Web 2.0 and social media? And how is Flam App trying to solve that? Because, there is so many problems when it comes to social media, and especially, Facebook, which is kind of transitioned to, changing the name to Meta. It has, social media, I think, has been that single factor of making geography history, and anyone and everyone's become like a friend, family. That's the positives, but then there's negatives, which is data hoarding, data manipulation, and the list goes on and on. So as someone who's building a social media, AR based social media metaverse company, it's a huge problem. What are you doing to kind of solve that?
Sure. So Eddie, I think these are two different problem statements, right? So when we talk about, and that's where a lot of us confuse, but essentially when we talk about metaverse, it's the next phase of internet, right? So internet, as I mentioned earlier as well, internet has always been two-dimensional, and metaverse is going to be 3D internet. So everything is going to be three-dimensional, and that's where immersion happens, right? So for example, you and I talking right now on Zoom call is two-dimensional because we are on a screen-first interface, right? So internet has always been screen-first, whether it's like desktops or laptops or smartphones, and that's the reason, because screens are by default two-dimensional, rectangular, flat interfaces. Hence, everything on internet has been 2D, right? Now, if you and I were in the real world, supposedly as at a cafe, it would be three-dimensional because eyes by default are lenses, right? So we are on lens first or camera first interface, and hence everything is 3D. And it's more immersive, obviously, right? So what happens when we talk about metaverse, it's all about interfacing. So we will move from flat 2D interfaces to enhanced camera first or 3D spatial interfaces, which will make everything three-dimensional, right? And that's going to be more immersive, just like real world, where we meet and hang out, everything is 3D, right? Now, everything that's happening on the internet will happen on the metaverse, because whether you do shopping or whether you hang out with friends or whether you play a game, if it is in 3D, it's going to be more engaging because it's more immersive. So Metaverse is not a use case of a particular gaming thing or social or education. Everything happening on the internet, all the use cases will happen in the metaverse because it makes sense, engagement wise, immersion wise. But Web3 and what you talked about data is not essentially critical to adoption of metaverse. It's like a protocol, right? So for example, you can build an internet company, which is like a two-dimensional social network with Web3 protocols where there is ownership of content. And that protocol is not critical or central to the metaverse. Now, once you're building a metaverse company, you can have Web3 protocols or Web2 protocols where either you want to centrally control the whole user data and run optimizations on top of it, or either you use Web3 protocols to make sure that users own their data and then all of those things in general, right? So I think these are two different buckets altogether. When you talk about metaverse, it's like internet. When you talk about Web3, it's a protocol. It's a protocol, or the way you transact. You can transact in a Web3 protocol. You can basically let people own their data in Web3 protocols. All of that is a separate bucket. But yes, when we talk about Flam, we talk about the pure play metaverse use case to start with, where we talk about how the whole social media networking will happen in 3D. And essentially, we want to integrate Web3 protocols 6 months, 12 months down the line, where users can mint their avatars, their content experiences as NFTs. They own their data, they can share the data, they can monetize their data whenever they want, however they want. So all of that is a part of our entire vision.
You mentioned about metaverse and Web3. I was talking
Yeah.
about the inherent problems of social media, like the data manipulation, the data hoarding, the Web 2 of, the way businesses have functioned so far, where, as a content creator, if you're creating something, the only thing that you end up getting are likes, while all the monetary benefits are going to the organization itself. So is that going to flip, was the question. I mean, because with social media, obviously, when we're talking about the metaverse, yes, we're going to break away from the boundary that restricts us, the 2D flat interface, and we're going to get into the 3D world eventually, when we have the tech stack, with your AR, VR, MR glasses, and possibly your haptic feedback, where you will be able to touch, feel the virtual world. That's cool. And the Web3 is a different stack. I get that. But is the inherent problem of social media, or the inherent problem of a physical world, where we live on division, where or businesses function on a very centralized manner, is that going to change? Is that going to be the new language? Because I think Gen Z are expecting that, wherein your metaverses and your Web3 companies are far away from decentralization. So my question largely was pertaining to that, whether all the social ill wills of a society or Web2, will that be transferred onto the same language, or is that a different metaverse?
This is going to be a little counterintuitive to what you might be asking, but we've been on internet for last 20 years, right? And whenever you introduce a new platform, specifically in the social segment, right, whether we talk about Yahoo Messenger, Orkut, MySpace, Facebook, and then multiple social networks happen, right? Till date, Clubhouse as well, right? Now, every time there is a new social platform, they crack a use case, and the use case is the central reason why it is massive. Not the protocol, right? So for example, sometimes it's the protocol as well, right? For example, Snapchat talked about privacy. They talked about how people in relationship could share images and text, and then there is no and basically they can be more spontaneous because Snapchat has the protocol and the use case where they basically make sure you cannot revisit that image again, right? So basically it just goes away. It's off the internet, basically, right? So sometimes you talk about the protocol, sometimes you talk about some inherent reason why the social media platform picks up, but it can be either the protocol or the inherent way of media that becomes critical for the users to be on the platform. but it need not be just about the protocols. For example, even on Snap, why it essentially kept picking up was not just the reason where the images disappear after watching it once, but because they introduced AR lenses, right? Because that was never done before. So that was a new media type that excited Gen Z, right? So you are right. Gen Z today are talking about data, ownership of data, transfer of data, who monetizes, whether it's centralized, decentralized. But I think at the end of the day, every time you see any social media, vulnerability in the system increases. Like people become more vulnerable. This is a very, very candid comment. But whether you talk about Instagram or Snap filters or TikTok is like one of the very vulnerable platforms. Your content can be seen across the world. Anyone can see that. Anyone can download that, and you have no control. It's not just the friends, it's an interest graph. There is no social graph in TikTok. It's an interest graph. So, for example, if a girl records a video from some remote village, she can have tens of millions of views. She has no control over that, right? Because it's an interest graph, it's not a social graph. So, what I'm trying to say is that we are going to solve the use case first, basically the content type which excites people. And all of that, by the way, is going to happen on smartphones. So we are an application first approach. We're going an application first approach. We don't really care about glasses or Oculus or VR devices. No, all the 3D creation and consumption will happen on your smartphones. And then that's the USP we basically are focusing on. Once that is cracked, and that's what I talk about all the time, you have to worry about one problem at a time. You basically solve what excites Gen Z to the core, right? Not basically just the logical reasonings, right? I mean, we are essentially building an illogical company, and all the social networks that you've seen in the last 20 years were illogical companies. Like, who would really imagine that a dog filter company like Snap could become $100 billion company? It doesn't make sense. There is no logic to it. Like, what you asked me is a very logical thought, right? It is logic. It is pure logic that, hey, who owns the data, who monetizes? But believe me, Eddie, like, you talk to Gen Zs, they don't really care about all of that. They just want to have the purest form of entertainment, which excites them, and which they can share with friends. It's basically illogical. If Snap was a logical company, they would make a girl look beautiful, right? Like, if at all I can put a lens on my face, I would make that person look better. But Snap made them look like a dog or a cat, which doesn't make sense. It's not logical, right? So what I'm trying to say is, like, if you are anyway building for Gen Z, build something that excites them rather than logically solving their problems. No, logic comes later after massive adoption. So, for example, if I have 100 million Gen Z who get excited because of the kind of content they can create on Flam, 3D content experiences, and the way they can consume in 3D on the smartphone itself. Once that happens in next 6 months, 12 months, that's when we will integrate Web3 protocols, pure play data ownership, because we know that once the platform begins to pick up beyond a point, you have to make sure that you are logically solving certain problems. But logic cannot lead to massive outcomes. You have to have a use case which makes sense for massive audience.
Right. So yeah, sure. I mean, I do agree with you in parts, but I also feel that I think the Gen Z are a very smart lot. And I think they are asking extremely brave questions. They are aware of, how businesses function. Though, yes, I think they are also illogical in ways, but I think there's a nice marriage of sorts of their thought, the collective thought that they function. And I do agree that, at this point in time, I think being mobile first is the right approach, because hardwares have their own challenges, because yeah, and it's going to take some time for it to possibly become like this, or maybe a lens, and it's going to be a long journey. So mobile, I think we 80-90% of the global population already has some kind of mobile, so that's a cool approach. What's the patterns that you have seen of Gen Z's consumption? Because I think almost 5 or 8 years back, I think all of our communication, transaction largely existed in the physical world. What I mean by that is, we as we, if you have to buy something, you have to get down, go to the kirana, buy stuff. I mean, if you were to travel somewhere, you go to a travel agent, or get your tickets and stuff like that. And just in the in a short span of maybe 8 years or odd, and especially I think COVID has been like a major game changer, quickly moved on to this digital world where and all our consumption transaction is happening largely on the digital world. So this physical to digital movement, and especially with the metaverse, how do you see Gen Z's consumption pattern changing, and how do you think that consumption pattern is going to impact businesses?
Excellent question, and I think that's one of the most critical things that will happen in the metaverse. I think consumption will change. The way people consume content, the way people consume information will change forever. For example, when I talked about interfacing, right? So there are two critical focus areas when you talk about building a metaverse company. I think the first critical area is in general about metaverse, like in general about internet or metaverse. You have to democratize creation. So, for example, if you look at any particular social network which came up and became massively popular, whether it's Instagram or whether it's TikTok, they democratized new form of content creation. So, for example, before Instagram, it was very hard to edit an image. Like for example, a designer knows how to manage all those parameters and make an image better or enhance an image. But for you or me, they just introduced filters. I could select a filter and my image looks 100x better. They democratized image creation, good image creation and sharing, right? TikTok democratized video creation and sharing on internet for the very first time. They basically made sure that everyone can create videos on TikTok on few clicks. So one of the most critical parts of building a metaverse is to democratize 3D AR VR content creation. That's the first part, right? Now coming to the second part, which is like consumption, which you talked about, right? Consumption today, if you look at internet, consumption has been happening on 2D screens. That's why, for example, even in this call, me consuming your part is basically happening on a 2D screen. That's why it's 2D. It's a flat screen, right? In the metaverse, consumption will happen on the camera, and that's going to be a breakthrough. It's going to be camera first interfaces. We will move from screen first to camera first interfaces, right? Now that is a game changer, because if you think about cameras, like if you think or if you ask anyone, cameras have always been perceived in the last 100 years as creation devices. You use a camera to click a picture, click a video, but cameras have always been perceived as creation devices. In the metaverse, cameras will become massively consumption devices. Basically, you will consume through a camera, and that's when everything will become 3D. Just like you consume this world through your eyes, which are like lens first, camera first, everything is 3D. Imagine consuming all the information, all the content through a camera. That's when everything will become 3D. So on Flam as well, what we are changing as a habit, and what we've already been able to change to a large extent, I mean, obviously in early stages, but pretty good adoption. More than 1 million people on Flam have already consumed through a camera. So basically they created AR content and then they consumed multiple times through a camera. So they would just open camera on their phones or basically on the Flam app, and then they continue to just hold the camera and consume content through the camera. That's when everything becomes 3D.
Right. I think obviously it's going to be a game changer, and possibly the route for mass adoption of metaverse. There's also this other side of it, which is like, I mean, with have you seen this film by Kichi Matsuda called Hyper Reality? Yeah. So that's like a dystopian picture of what the future might hold. Yes. So there are these various pros and cons, of where we are going. It's exciting as well as scary. Would you like to talk a little bit more about Flam app, what you're building now, and your roadmap ahead?
Sure, Eddie. I think I'll pick up something from what you mentioned, a dystopian world, right? I mean, most of us imagine metaverse as a dreamy virtual world where any random stuff is happening, right? avatars are roaming around in avatars and then basically in random worlds, and all of that is some part of metaverse, but that's not really metaverse. Metaverse is basically a shared sense of space, which is like immersive world where everything is in 3D. Now, 3D doesn't have to be avatars. 3D essentially doesn't have to be unreal random avatars, random places, right? How we imagine 3D is basically real, like very real. If you want, you can have unreal personalities, you can have unreal accounts, unreal avatars on the platform. But essentially, when we talk about 3D, we talk about photorealistic avatars. Like, what if? So basically, one of the features that you might understand pretty quick is time travel. So we will be introducing time travel pretty soon on Flam app in next year, which will mean that, for example, if you and your family are in a cafe, right? So you are in a cafe, you record that moment, right? I'm calling it record that moment because it's not a video, it's basically a whole 3D experience that you record. Now, 10 years down the line, if you are at that cafe again or near that location, you will get a notification that, hey, Eddie, you were here with the family, you want to have a look. You click on the camera, or if you're wearing glasses, glasses will guide you to that location, and you can see the exact same people having fun. And that's not unreal avatars. That's like photorealistic avatars. You will feel as if everyone is real, and you won't be able to differentiate what's real, what's unreal. And you can go inside that world, which is like 5 years in the past, right? You can enter that world, you can talk to people over there, they will respond to you real time. And that's like 5-year-old people, right? That's what we want to build. And that's going to be immersive beyond magic. So that's how we imagine 3D, right? That's how we imagine metaverse. And that's why it has started to make sense for users on Flam and for us as well. So we don't see metaverse as what it started with. It started with just some random cyberpunk avatars doing some random stuff, and obviously that's going to be some part of the play, but that's not the entire story. It's going to be way beyond that story.
Yes, I think the metaverse is going to be a one-to-one representation of a physical world. I think we'll be building out these virtual worlds which will completely transform the way we live, work, and play. So instead of us going to a school, the school will come to us. And for but my son, 7-year-old, is in the metaverse first school, and that's what's going to happen. I think once all the layers of technologies get binded, because it's a culmination of 2D, 3D, AR, VR, MR, Web 3.0, artificial intelligence, 5G, IoT, the sensorizing of the physical world. When all of that come into play, I think we'll have the metaverse that we're talking about. Whether it's going to be utopian, dystopian, that's a conversation I think which will pan out in the next possibly decade or so, when it completely binds through and we have a metaverse. You in the course of conversation, you were mentioning about how Snap kind of completely upended the image, TikTok upended video. Yeah. What are your views on generative AI? Because 2022 has been the year of generative AI. We can do. Nobody would have thought, to create a design, you still you require a team. But here is my 7-year-old boy sitting in front of the computer and putting in these crazy prompts and thoughts, and voila, you have an image. So how is that going to impact metaverse according to you?
It's even to a lot of people, it's not even imaginable, right? If certain things can happen this way. I think in the metaverse, how I have started to imagine this, and I think such companies will also emerge by the mid or end of next year, how you can generate 3D models, because that's what, we've been able to do images, text to image, text to text, image to text, image to image. All of that is now possible, right? With the current models. We need to go beyond these models. For example, we need to go text to video or text to 3D, video to 3D, 3D to 3D, right? I think it will take time, but not more than a year. With the kind of speed that we've been able to develop models like the current ones we talked about, once they start to make an impact in 3D, it'll be like magical. Like the only way to fast forward and accelerate metaverse creation is AI. So we need generative AI capabilities to create and modify 3D models as well.
Right.
So far, we've been able to do with text and images. We need to quickly accelerate these for videos and 3D. That's when metaverse can move much faster.
Right. And that's already happening. There's Luma AI, which is leveraging nerves for 3D assets and 3D environment creation. There's Jedi, which is doing image to 3D. There's Google's Dream Fusion, which is doing image to 3D. There's Nvidia's Magic 3D. They're doing image to 3D. So there's so many.
It has already started. Yeah, 100%. It has already started. The way, when I say by the next mid of next year, end of next year, when I talk about that kind of time scale, I'm talking about massive adoption of these 3D creation tools as well. So, for example, when you talk about Luma, when you talk about Google's tool, how can anyone do it and then effectively as well? So, the way Lensa has been able to do it on the current generative AI models, that is like super impressive. So once we are able to generate 3D models to that kind of effectivity, that's when I think it'll just move at a phenomenal speed. But yes, you're right. 3D models, even we have developed certain tools in-house which can generate image to 3D. Literally, like you just have to upload one image and we can create your entire 3D avatar. But we need to make sure that 3D avatar looks exactly like you, more photorealistic, high fidelity. All of those things might take 3 months more, 6 months.
Right. What are the challenges and opportunity for an enterprise in the metaverse? And my second question is, as a startup, how satisfied are you with the ecosystem, from the government, investor support when it comes to metaverse?
First things first, I think when you are, so basically we are building the application layer of the metaverse, right? So for example, there are multiple layers from human interface / hardware to technology to software infra, creator economy. There are multiple layers of the metaverse. We are focusing on the application layer of the metaverse, which is like building the social media network, right? Now we are so early in the whole space. We are so early in the metaverse space that most of the technologies that really are needed to build the application layer don't exist. So for example, if you want to build a platform like TikTok in 3D or Instagram like platform in 3D, you need to build motion capture. Now, motion capture infra doesn't exist today, which is like usable by a lot of people, millions of people, right? So we are building that infra as well. Now, the point is, when you end up building the application layer, you build so much of infra that you can use that infra for a lot of enterprises, because enterprises need that infra. So for example, one of the infras that we developed was a camera technology, AR camera. So we wanted to develop AR camera for our own product use case, but that AR camera tech stack doesn't exist. And now that you have the camera stack, we evolved that camera stack into an AR camera SDK, which any company can use. So now that AR camera SDK can be integrated in Flipkart, in Amazon, in any company across the world for a particular use case. And then when a user switches onto that AR camera, they can look at certain stuff in 3D, whatever the use case is. So that's something which enterprises have already started to use. Like we have already started selling to companies in the US and European region, purely using our AR camera tech stack. Right? So I think more of such infra technologies will be developed by Flam, which can be leveraged by other companies. And then companies need that for one of the other use cases. The other thing that you talked about, investor interest and in general house. So I think we are in a very interesting space right now where everyone is excited. So there are certain people who have doubts because Meta hasn't been able to introduce products at that speed that they talked about, I think last year. But people who are closely observing the space have immense confidence. Like people who are just at a very high level, they just read New York Times and just some high level news, they are always going to be skeptical. I think Metaverse is in early stages, just like internet was 30 years back. So New York Times used to talk BS about Jeff Bezos as well. So I think we are in that kind of a stage right now, very early stages. But essentially, if you are closely following what Zuckerberg is trying to do, what Snap is trying to do, what Roblox is trying to do, you will have immense confidence. And I think we have got tons of such investors. So yeah.
Lovely. Yes, I double you. I think we in an exciting space, and I think lots of people kind of pull down, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook for certain reasons, which is right, for the data manipulation and voter manipulation, things like that. But then there's that other side of Mark Zuckerberg and Meta. I think he's been the single individual in the planet who's driven the conversation when it comes to virtual reality and metaverse. Yeah, and yes, we are in such an exciting point of time, with all these converging technologies are going to open up products, services, and solutions, which is going to completely define our future. My last question to you: if there are these startups and entrepreneurs who are listening and who would want to, do something in the lines of what you've done, what would be your advice, suggestion to them, and paint a picture of the metaverse you want to see?
Sure. First things first, this is more or less from the last question and conversation we had. Mark Zuckerberg is going to be in the history books for what he's doing. So for all the entrepreneurs who really want to build something, I think who are listening to this podcast, I think one very simple thing which I always say: if you're really obsessed about something, don't wait and start building. It doesn't matter. Like, Mark did not wait for anyone. Like, he was a public company, he was running a public company, he's a public company CEO. It's very hard to change the name. Facebook was a brand in itself. Like, it's the fifth company to become $1 trillion company in the world, and the fastest one, right? Fastest company to become $1 trillion company. And their CEO decides to change the name because he has got that obsession to build the metaverse. And it's all the same, whether you are starting, whether you're a public company CEO, it's equally hard to make things happen. So if you're really obsessed about seeing something in this world, I think no one else can do it better than you. So just start today. Don't really think what New York Times is saying or what India Times is saying, what anyone else out there is saying, right? Just start building. And if you don't build, that product or that service will never exist in this world. So if you're obsessed about certain things or a certain problem, just start today. Like, don't worry. I think the picture I can paint about metaverse is very fundamental. Whatever we do on internet will happen in the metaverse. It is beyond avatars, beyond virtual worlds, beyond just virtual reality. It's going to be everything 3D. So people will shop in 3D, people will study or get education in 3D. When I say 3D, it's basically, so for example, we used to have phone calls, audio calls 10 years back. Today we are having a video call because this is more immersive. Imagine if you and I could feel as if we are in front of each other and having a shared space. That's going to be metaverse. So we will talk in 3D, we will have education in 3D, teacher will feel as if there are 50 students in the class. You will start to believe in that thing, right? That is metaverse. Whether you social network, play games, everything is going to be in 3D. Very, very real, very immersive.
Lovely. Shourya, I really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. I think we living in exciting times. The convergence of technologies and this building blocks that we're laying out the metaverse, I think is going to completely upend how we educate, do healthcare or work or even play. And it's such an exciting space. I just hope that the future that we build, we do not make the same mistakes, because I think it's the first time in human history we humans have got the opportunity to look at the wrongs and try and correct this. Because the new world doesn't, and especially the new generation, they understand what what's right, what's wrong. So I hope that what we build out, instead of making small iteration, we reimagine the future, because that's the opportunity that we have. So wish you and your team the very best. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. Until the next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you, Shourya. Really appreciate this.
Ready, bye.